The story you are about to hear, The Believers, is a classic horror masterpiece by Robert Arthur. It centers on a radio host who decides to broadcast a live show from a house whispered to be haunted. Interestingly, it was based on an even older tale titled Ghost Hunt by H. Russell Wakefield. Over the years, this narrative has grown into a legend of its own, even inspiring an episode of the iconic series Tales from the Crypt. "This is it," Nick Dean said with enthusiasm, after he had stared down at the old Carraday house for a couple of minutes. "This is what I had in mind, right down to the last rusty hinge and creaking floorboard." Danny Lomax heaved a sigh of relief. "Praise be," he said. "We've wasted almost a week finding a joint that suited you just right, and that doesn't leave us much time to start beating the drum. Although I'll admit..." Danny squinted down at the brooding old pile of stone and lumber that still retained some traces of a one-time dignity. "I'll admit you've really turned up a honey. If that isn't a haunted house, it'll do until one comes along." Nick Dean stood for a moment longer, appraising the Carraday mansion, on whose arched entrance the carved figure 1784 still defied the corroding elements. The building was a long, L-shaped, colonial-type house, with stone foundations and hand-sawed, clapboard upper structure. It had been painted some dark color once, but the color had gone with the years, leaving the structure a scabrous, mottled hue that had, to the eye of one who stared too long at it in the uncertain light of dusk, an unpleasant appearance of slow, sinuous movement. The building was two-storied, with attics, and seemed to contain a number of rooms. Woods, once cut back, had crept up almost to the walls, and though it was only second-growth stuff, pine and cedar, they gave the place a cramped, crowded feeling. A weed-grown dirt carriage drive connecting with a half-impassable county, and the tumbled ruins of a couple of outbuildings finished off the scene. "It has everything, Danny," Nick Dean went on with animation. "Absolutely everything but a ghost." "Which is just fine with me," asserted the technical assistant allotted him by his radio hour sponsors, So Pure Soaps, Present Dare, Danger with Dean. "Of course, I don't believe in ghosts, as the hillbilly said about the hippopotamus, but that's all the more reason I don't want to go meeting one. I'm too old to go around revising my beliefs just to please a spook." "That's just it," Nick Dean told him. "A resident hint that somebody or other had seen, or thought he'd seen, and described, would cramp my style. Of course, nobody comes out here, and it's spooky enough to make any casual passerby take another road. But there's no definite legend attached to it, and what I've been looking for, that, plus a proper background. And this has the proper background. 3 generations of Carradays died here. Of malaria, probably. Look at the swamp back there. The last Carraday ran away to sea and died in Java. The place has been empty 15 years now, except for a tramp found in it one winter dead of pneumonia. Nobody's going to buy it, not away out here in a swampy section of woods, and for a couple $1,000 the estate agent will be glad enough to let us have the key and do anything we want to it, including furnishing it with a nice brand-new ghost, which is just what I'm going to do. Nicholas Dean, hand-tailored spooks, ghost maker to the nobility." Danny Lomax grunted. "You know, I used to read your books and believe 'em. That chapter where you told about the doomed dancing girl in the old temple at Angkor Wat and how you saved her just before the priest came for her gave me a big kick once. I was sap enough to think it had really happened." "Well, there is a temple at Angkor Wat," Nick Dean grinned, "and dancing girls, too. For all I know, one of them may be a virgin. So if you enjoyed the story, why complain? You believed it when you read it, didn't you?" "Yeah," Danny Lomax agreed, stamping out a cigarette. "I believed it." "Then you got your money's worth." The tall, bronzed man asserted sun lamp treatments every evening, carefully timed by his valet Walters, kept that bronze in good repair. And 1 million people still believe that story, just as 5 million people are going to believe in the Carriday curse. Okay, the small, wiry man assented. I'm not here to argue. Let's scram. Even if the Carriday curse is strictly a Nick Dean fake, I don't like this dump in these shadows. If I had a lot of baby spooks I wanted to raise to be nice, big hants I'd bring 'em here and plant 'em. The atmosphere is so unhealthy. Nick Dean grinned again, the flashing-toothed smile that had won him indulgence all around the globe, had been photographed against the columns of the Athenaeum, halfway up Mount Everest, atop an elephant going over the Alps, and too many other places to list. He brushed back the jet-black hair that lay so smoothly against his skull and started back toward the road from the little knoll they'd climbed to get a view of the house. Danny Lomax followed, making plans out loud. We can have him run a rebroadcast unit on a truck up to the road here, he decided. You'll have a portable sender on your back and the truck will pick it up and retransmit to Hartford. Hartford will pipe it into New York and out through the networks. We'll give the equipment a thorough check and there's not much chance of anything going wrong. Your ratings have been falling off lately, but this'll put you up on top again. Most of your listeners have already read the stuff you've been dramatizing on the air, you know. This one, a direct broadcast from a haunted house at night on Friday the 13th, will pull 'em in. You're a fake, Dean, but you've got some good ideas, and this is one of the better ones. If what? Nick demanded, as they reached the road and prepared to clamber into the gleaming car that had gotten them there. If you pull it off, Danny Lomax took the right-hand seat and slammed the door. A lot of newspaper guys don't like you any too well, and if there's any stink to this thing, they'll horse-laugh it to death. There has to be a ghost, and your audience has to believe in it. Don't make any mistake about that. There'll be a ghost, Nick Dean shrugged, putting the car into motion. And they'll believe in it. I'll be right in the room with them. I'm working on the script now. I'm going to ask them to turn out the light when they listen, and imagine they're with me, waiting in the dark for the thing that for 100 years has been the curse of the Carridays to appear. I'll be armed only with a flashlight, a Bible, and a contract, Danny interrupted. Sorry, but I've lost all my illusions since meeting you. And a crucifix, Dean continued, a little nettled by now. They'll hear boards creaking and a death watch beetle ticking in the wall, and plenty of other details. I'll make them up as I go along. Spontaneity always gives the most convincing effect, I've found, and they'll be convinced. Aren't they always? Yeah, the little advertising man agreed reluctantly. When you turn on the heat, old ladies swoon with excitement, and little kids scream all night in their cribs. There was one heart failure, an old maid in Dubuque. After last month's show, the one in which you were fighting an octopus 40 feet beneath the surface, down in the Malay purling waters. There'll be 6 this time, Nick Dean prophesied complacently, when I start into the Carriday house to meet the thing with a face like an oyster. A face like an oyster, huh? Danny Lomax repeated, and swallowed hard. That's what it's going to look like? Nick Dean chuckled and nodded. If there's anything deader looking than a watery blue oyster that's been open too long, he said. I don't know what it is. Where was I? Oh, yes. Well, when I start into that house to wait for the approach of the thing with an oyster face, I'm going to scare the living daylights out of 5 million people, if you guys do your jobs right. We will, Danny promised. We'll ship out photos of the house. I'll plant the story the locals should repeat to a couple of fellows in the village. We'll ballyhoo you all the way down the line. The only thing we won't do is try to fix the weatherman to make it a stormy night. You'll have to take your chances on that. It's generally foggy down here in the swamps at night, Dean replied, quite seriously. Fog is as good as a storm any time. Yeah, Danny Lomax agreed, twisting around to look down at the house in the hollow below, the road having taken them up a slope behind it. Fog was already forming in tenuous gray wisps, as the disappearance of the sun brought cool air currents rolling down into the swampy dell. They made a little dancing approach toward the empty, silent building that was quite unappetizing to anyone with a good imagination. "Fog's good enough for me, any time. You know, Dean, maybe it's a good thing you don't believe in spooks yourself." "Maybe it is, at that." Nick Dean grinned as they topped a rise and the Carraday house disappeared from view. "Maybe it is, at that." It was not a foggy night. Yet there were mists about the Carraday house, as Danny Lomax, Nicholas Dean, and two newspapermen, Ken Blake and Larry Miller, prepared to enter it. Sitting as it did in the very bottom of a little glen, so that any cool, mist-producing air currents there might be would flow toward it. It was wrapped in pale vapor that danced and shifted in slow, stately movements. A quarter moon thrust a weak finger of radiance down into the woods. It was 11 o'clock, and time for Dare Danger with Dean to hit the ether with its special broadcast. Danny Lomax had earphones clamped to his ears, tentacles of wire trailing back from them to the broadcast truck pulled up beside the road, on the little rise that overlooked the house. The house was 400 yards away, and Danny Lomax was conscious of a vague regret it wasn't 4 million, as he snatched off the earphones and dropped his hand. Nick Dean caught the signal, which meant that the theme song was finished, as well as the lengthy announcement outlining the circumstances of the broadcast from the New York studio. His deep, expressive voice took up the tale without a hitch. "This is Nicholas Dean speaking," he said easily into the mic attached to his chest and connected to the pack broadcaster slung over his shoulder. "The old Carraday mansion lies in a depression below Mo, some 400 yards away. Wan moonlight illuminates it. Veils of fog wrap around it, as if to hide it from man's gaze. For 15 years no human being has spent a night beneath its roof, alive." His voice paused significantly to let his unseen audience experience its first prickle of pleasurable terror. "But tonight I am going to brave the curse of the Carradays. I am going to enter the house, and in the great master bedroom, where 3 generations of Carradays died, I am going to wait for the unknown thing that legends tell of to appear. I am going toward the house now, with 2 reputable newspaper men at my side. One of them has a pair of handcuffs, the other the key. They are going to cuff me to the sturdy bedposts of the ancient 4-poster that can be seen through the dust-covered window in the master bedroom. That is to ensure that I shall not leave before midnight strikes. Before this ill-omened Friday, the 13th passes away into the limbo of the vanished days." Nick Dean's voice went on, rising and falling in carefully cadenced rolls, doing little tricks to the emotions of listeners a mile, 1,000 miles, 3,000 miles away. He and Danny Lomax and the 2 reporters trudged on downhill toward the house. This was a last-minute inspiration of Nick Dean's, this handcuff business. The press had taken a somewhat scoffing note toward the stunt broadcast, but Nick Dean's showman instinct had risen to the occasion. There was a compellingness to the idea of a man being chained in a deserted house, haunted or not, being unable to leave, which had impressed the radio column writers. Dean kept on talking as they approached the old mansion, flashlight beams dancing ahead of them. He described the woods, the night sounds, the dancing mist, the appearance of the empty, silent mansion ahead of them, and did a good job. Not that it was necessary for the 3 men with him. Even before they reached the house, the carefully cultivated skepticism which Blake and Miller had sported was gone from their faces. Cynical though they were, Danny Lomax thought he could catch traces of uneasiness on their countenances. The place had that kind of an atmosphere about it. "We are standing on the rotten, creaking porch now," Dean was telling his audience. One reporter is unlocking the door with the key given us reluctantly by the white-haired agent for the property, a man whose expression tells us that he knows many things about this house his closed lips will not reveal. The door creaks open. Our lights probe the black throat of the hall. Dust is everywhere, seeming inches thick. It rises and swirls about us as we enter. They went in, and Nick Dean's tread was the firmest of the four as they strode the length of a narrow hall and reached the stairs. Their lights showed side rooms, filled with old furniture whose dust covers had not been removed in almost 2 decades. The stairs were winding and creaked. The air was as musty as it always is in houses long closed. They reached the upstairs, and a finger of moonlight intruded through an end window. Their flashlights reflected off a dusty mirror, and Larry Miller jumped uneasily. Nick Dean chuckled into the microphone, and a million listeners nodded in quick approval of his courage. "My friends are nervous," Nick Dean was telling them. "They feel the atmosphere that hangs so heavy in these silent rooms trod only by creatures of the unseen. But we are now in the bedroom where I shall wait." The bedroom was big. The door leading into it, though, was low and narrow, and the windows were small. A broken shutter hanging outside creaked in an unseen air current. There were 2 old chairs, a bureau, a cedar chest, a rag rug, and the 4-poster bedstead. A coverlet, gray with dust, lay over the mattress. Nick Dean grimaced as he saw it, but his voice did not falter. Danny Lomax snatched the coverlet off the bed and shook it. Dust filled the air, and he coughed as he put the coverlet back into place. He slid a chair up beside the bed, and Nick Dean, without disturbing the broadcast, slid off his pack transmitter and placed it on the chair. He lay down on the bed, and Larry Miller, with a pair of handcuffs from his pocket, linked one ankle to the left bedpost. Danny Lomax adjusted the mic so that Nick Dean could speak into it without having to hold it, and Dean waved his hand in a signal of preparedness. "My friends are preparing to depart," he told his audience, and his words leaped from the room to the waiting truck, from there to Hartford, 20 miles away, and thence to New York, then to the world, or whatever part of it might be listening. In a moment, I shall be alone. I have a flashlight, but to conserve the batteries, I am going to turn it out. May I make a suggestion? Why don't you, who are listening, turn out your lights too, and we will wait together in darkness for the approach of the creature known as the Curse of the Carridays, a creature which I hope, before the next hour is over, to describe to you. What it is, or what it looks like, I do not know. The one man who could tell, the agent for the property, faithful to his trust though the last Carriday died long since in far-off Java, will not speak. Yet, if the portents are favorable, we, you and I, may see it tonight. Clever, Danny Lomax thought. His trick of identifying the audience with himself, making them feel as if they were on the spot too. One of the big secrets of his success. "Now," Nick Dean was saying, "I take my leave of my companions." Then Danny and the 2 reporters were leaving. Nick Dean kicked his leg, the chain of the handcuff rattled, and Larry Miller jumped. Nick waved a sardonic hand after them. They went downstairs, not dawdling, and no one spoke until they were outside. Then Blake drew a deep breath. "He's a phony," he said, with a reluctant admiration. "And you know as well as I do that if he sees anything tonight, it'll be strictly the product of his imagination, or of that bottle in his coat pocket. But just the same, I wouldn't spend an hour in that place, handcuffed to the furniture for a month's pay." Without hesitating, they set off for the waiting truck, and the small knot of men, technicians, reporters, and advertising agency men, clustered around it. And as they hurried, in Boston, in Sioux Falls, Kalamazoo, Santa Barbara, and 1,000 other towns, Lights went out in a house here, another there, as some off Nick Dean's far-flung audience obeyed his melodramatic suggestion to listen to him in the darkness. And 2 million families settled themselves to wait with him, hanging on his every word, their acceptance of everything he said complete, their belief utter. When the three of them reached the rebroadcast truck again, the little group of half a dozen men there were clustered about the rear, where a half-circle of light burned through the darkness, and a loudspeaker repeated Nick Dean's every word. Dean was building atmosphere still. His resonant voice was picturing the house, the shadows, the dust, the darkness that seemed to crouch within the hallways, and as he spoke, not a man there, but could see the pictures he evoked rising up before their eyes. "Listen," Nick Dean was saying, and Danny Lomax could visualize the big bronze man grinning sardonically as he spoke. "And hear with me the small night sounds that infest this ancient, spirit-ridden dwelling. Somewhere a board is creaking, perhaps for no tangible cause. I cannot tell, but it comes to me clearly. Listening, they could hear it too, the eerie, chill-provoking creak of a floorboard or stairway, in midnight silence." Nick Dean had 2 bits of wood in his pocket that he rubbed together to get that effect, but only Danny Lomax knew that. And even knowing, he did not like the sound. "I hear the creaking." Nick Dean's voice was low, suspense-filled now. "I hear the creaking, and something else, a monotonous tick-tick-tick that seems to become louder and louder as I listen to it, the frightening beat of the Death Watch beetle within the walls of this room." They could hear it, too, as Nick Dean's voice died out. Hear it, and their own breathing became faster, as if they too were in that room, listening with a man bound to the great 4-poster there. And in Atlanta, in Rochester, in Cincinnati, in Memphis, Mobile, Reno, Cheyenne, and 1,000 other cities and towns, Nick Dean's listeners heard it too, in the hushed silence in which they listened. They swallowed a little harder, looked about them a little uneasily, and smiled. Smiles that were palpably artificial, and they believed, Danny Lomax would have believed too, if he hadn't known of the small metal contrivance by which Nick Dean managed the Death Watch beetle noises. Even knowing, he admitted to himself that it was an impressive performance. When Nick Dean had boasted that he would make 5 million people believe in the curse of the Carridays, he had exaggerated, but not about their believing. His audience probably didn't number more than 5 million, but he had most of that 5 million by now in a complete state of acceptance for anything he might want to say next. Danny glanced at his watch, turning his wrist so that the timepiece caught the light. 35 minutes gone. 25 to go. Time now for Dean to start turning on the heat. Time for the sock punch to start developing. He'd built up his background and sold his audience. Now he ought to begin to deliver. He did. A moment later, Nick Dean's voice paused abruptly. The sudden silence held more suspense than any words he could have spoken. It held for 10 seconds, 20, 30. Then he broke it only with a half-whispered announcement. "I think I can hear something moving outside the house." Around the sound truck, there was utter silence, save for the whine of the generator that was pumping the broadcast over the hills and woods to Hartford. "Whatever it is," Nick Dean's voice was still low, still that of a man who whispers an aside even while intent upon something else. "Whatever it is, it's coming closer. It seems to be moving slowly up from the small patch of swamp just south of the house." Absently, Danny Lomax reached for a cigarette. Nick was sticking to the general script they'd outlined. Almost at the last minute, they'd decided against a spiritual manifestation, a ghost, pure and simple. Instead, with his usual instinct for getting the right note, Nick Dean had switched to a thing. Something nameless, something formless, something unclassifiable.